Hello, everyone. Let's begin. Okay, this is the Renshi Academy Guided Study Course. This is part one, History and Philosophy of Kodokan Judo. So the Renshi Academy is the most elementary coaching course created by Sensei Steve Scott on behalf of the Judo Black Belt Association. This particular course of the Renshi Academy is being led by myself. I think it's important to know that the Renshi Academy workbook is copyrighted. You must have an official Renshi Academy workbook to participate in this guided course. These videos contain a guided study version of the Renshi Academy being led by myself under permission from Steve Scott. The videos are for pre-approved students only, and these videos may not be shared. Okay, this is a guided lecture course. I will be issuing video lectures that I will expand upon and call attention to the critical elements in the Renshi Academy workbook. Okay. This is also an interactive course. So you will be taking guided notes as you complete the course. So taking these notes will increase the interactiveness of the course and improve the retention of the things you learn. The notes will also directly help you answer the questions that are found in the workbook at the end of each section. Now, I can't force you to take notes, but I strongly recommend you do, and I will explicitly tell you when to take notes and what you should write in those notes. So there's not going to be any check if you're taking notes or not, but if you're really trying to get something out of this course, this is going to be the best and easiest way to help you do that because it'll help you participate in the learning itself. And we know from research that's a powerful practice. So, once again, this course is a totally optional course. You're doing this because you want to do it. And so, therefore, you should want to get the most out of it possible. And taking these guided notes when I ask you to will help you accomplish that. And we know that from research. So I ask that you do please fully participate by taking these notes. It's not going to be a constant thing. It's going to be a very specific thing at certain times and places when I ask you to. Okay? So this course is going to be divided into 6 sections that correspond to the book that you have. Number 1, it'll be Judo History and Philosophy, and that'll also be today's lesson. So the next time we do this next Sunday, it'll be the movements of judo. And the third lesson will be the classification of judo techniques, followed by judo kata. And 5, the use of rank in judo. And finally, 6, judo terminology. There will be 1 video lesson for each of the 6 sections. These videos will be emailed out every Sunday for 6 weeks directly, at the end of which time the course is completed. Before you start, please know that each lesson will take, I'm estimating 20 to 25 minutes to complete. That really is just a guess. It may take more, it may take less. Okay. You should read each specific section of the workbook before watching the video. You should have the workbook with you as you watch the video to refer back to. So you are going to need a pen or pencil and a notebook in order to take the notes. You are going to have specific writing tasks that will help you take the guided notes. These guided notes will prepare you to answer the questions that are found in the workbook at the end of each section. Okay. So section 1, which is what we're now beginning, Judo History and Philosophy, our learning target is students will understand the history and philosophy of Kodokan Judo and be able to explain its meaning, origins, guiding principles, and educational purpose. And so we're going to identify some specific objectives that we're going to aim for to accomplish that larger task. So by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to define judo, explain jujitsu as the predecessor of judo, explain the 3-culture model of judo, explain the 2 underlying principles of judo, describe the 4 teaching methods of judo, and summarize the historical context that shaped judo's growth. So let's begin to understand the word judo. First, understand that jujitsu predates judo and serves as its antecedent. So traditional jujitsu comes before Kodokan Judo. So let's look at jujitsu, the predecessor. Okay. Jujitsu is the art of yielding. So on your notes, I want you to write down what jujitsu is. And once again, it's the art of yielding. Okay. We'll move on in just a second. Understand that Kano realigned jujitsu into judo, and he did this in a variety of ways that we'll cover shortly. So, what does judo even mean? So, judo can be broken down into ju, or flexibility, or yielding, or adapting to strength. And do is the way, the path, the philosophy of life. So, once again, in your notes, I want you to write down what judo means. Once again, ju is flexibility, yielding or adapting to strength, and do is the way, the path. So, what does judo mean? It's the gentle way, it's the way of yielding, it's the way of flexibility. All of those are correct. Okay. Let's go ahead and do that task. Write down what judo means. Okay. Once again, judo is the gentle way or the way of yielding. There's a term called junori, the theory of yielding. It's the idea of adapting to force, to using force efficiently. So this was a term Jigoro Kano created. So no one said junori before Jigoro Kano, but he coined this term. He created this term to explain an idea or philosophy that was already present. He just created a term to summarize it. Okay. And he did this to explain the reason that Ju was included in the name of both judo and jujitsu, and also to explain its underlying theory. So now we're going to get into a little bit of a language lesson. Chinese culture first entered Japanese society in the 5th to 6th centuries of the Common Era. The Chinese writing system was also part of this cultural extension. So this is the point when the Japanese first gained a writing system. When the new Chinese writing characters, and those are called kanji in Japanese, arrived, they came with their own Chinese pronunciations. So these imported readings are what we now call onyomi, or sound readings. It represents a systematic attempt by the Japanese to preserve something close to the original Chinese reading when the kanji were first imported. But it's a lot more complicated than that, okay? So when you look at the onyomi reading, that's not something that just came over and just developed overnight. That came over in multiple layers, multiple points of history, and there's actually multiple types of onyomi readings. And understand too, it's not really giving a Chinese reading to Chinese characters. It's the Japanese who, over time, developed a systematic attempt, a systematic approach to giving a Chinese inspired reading to those characters, but not exactly the Chinese reading. They're not quite the same thing. It's a systematic approximation of it that once again varied over time. And that becomes very important in just a minute. But I do think, even though that's a little wordy, you're going to need that background to understand the rest. You can also have what's called the kunyomi. So the Japanese also attach their own native words to the same Chinese characters. So this is called the kunyomi, meaning reading. So the Japanese have these multiple systems of interpreting Chinese characters. They could use the onyomi reading, which is once again the Japanese approximation of the Chinese reading of Chinese characters, but they also can give them the kunyomi reading. So you have Chinese characters, but native Japanese words have been attached to those characters. Okay. When single characters are used in Japan, the kunyomi reading is typically used, not always. So if you look at the character, that top one, it's could be read as Mishi, the way, or that bottom character could be read as Yawara, or very similar terms, meaning yielding, flexible, gentle. But if you were to give them their onyomi readings, that top character, Mishi, would be read as Do, and that bottom character, Yawara, would be read as Ju. Okay. So as opposed to single character words, in compound words, what are called in Japanese chikugo, the onyomi reading is more often used. So the characters on the left become kendo, the sword way, and the characters underneath that become judo, the gentle way. Now let's look at the character Ju itself. The character Ju is a phono-semantic compound character. It's made up of two elements. The first is spear. This is the phonetic component. It gives a hint how to pronounce the word. Okay. And this other subcomponent is tree or wood. This is a semantic component. It suggests something that bends or yields, like soft or pliable wood. So you have the phonetic component, spear, it gives you a hint how to pronounce it. And the other character, the semantic component, it tells you what it is. And these two work together to create a more specific word. And in this case, that word is Jew. So the earliest meanings of Jew was soft or flexible, like soft wood or plant stems that bend easily, wood that's easily cut. And over time, this evolved into broader meanings such as gentleness and flexibility. And in philosophy, it came to symbolize the idea of strength through adaptability and yielding. So Ju also became tied to Taoism and Confucianism. So, for example, in a Taoist teaching, in the Tao Te Ching, the way and its power, the way and its virtue, verse 78, it says, the soft overcomes the hard, the gentle overcomes the rigid. And in Confucian teachings, we have the idea that the green reed which bends in the wind is stronger than the mighty oak. So Ju was eventually adopted both in the name and in the intended meaning of jujitsu. One of the common historical connections is said to be the expression Juno Sego. So Juno Sego means flexibility, control, strength. Okay. Flexibility or yielding overcomes power. Okay. This is an example of what's called a Yoji Jikugo, which is a four-character idiom or unique expression. So we have four-character rhyming idioms too in English. No pain, no gain, no guts, no glory, things like that. Okay. In this case, the specific Yoji Jikugo, Juno Seigo, originated in Chinese classics, specifically the three strategies of Duke Yellowstone. So the idea of Juno Seigo, flexibility overcomes strength, was a concept that was originally written to teach rulers how to lead, to teach them how to rule. And over time, it also became applied to military concepts and later still to martial arts concepts. And so in the Juno Riem practice, Kano explained that you do not resist force, you yield, you redirect, you exploit it. So a practical example would be the opponent pushes, you yield, you add a little traction, and then you use that to throw. And if you want to take that Juno Riem concept outside of physical judo and apply it to broader life, you could say that adaptability, flexibility in terms of changing your mindset, changing your approach, ensures your survival and growth. Okay. And once again, Juno Seigo, is this really the source of Ju and Judo and Jiu-Jitsu? It could well be. It's commonly said in historical things to be. But is it definite? No. It could be from another classical source, or it could just be from Ju as it existed in the background of Japanese society. So it could be from one of those or any of those. Okay, so we began to look at jujitsu. We should talk about the Koru, the old schools, or the Buge Rua. So literally, Buge is martial arts. So the military arts schools are a diverse group that largely existed in a specific time and place. They are mostly a product of the Edo, Tokyo. or the early modern period that existed between the end of the Japanese Age of Civil War, the Sengoku Jidai, and the start of the Meiji Restoration in 1868. So basically, what happened over a 250 oddish year period from the very start of 1600 through 1868, when the new Japanese government under Emperor Meiji took over. So jujitsu has been linked to the Koryu or the Buge-ryu, the martial arts schools. Ryu, as in Rua, it's a flow such as of water. It's also the term for a traditional art school. In this case, Ryu is a current not of water, but of thought. So jujitsu was seen as outdated and was linked to a number of problematic associations after the Meiji government took control in 1868. So one of the problems was it was linked to the samurai and the Koryu, the old schools. And those institutions, as well as other similar institutions of art or philosophy or ethics that were more closely linked to the old shogunal government, the old shoguns, those were being actively suppressed by the new Japanese government after 1868 under Emperor Meiji. Jiu-jitsu was also linked to street thuggery and professional bouts. And those were seen by Jigoro Kano as a problem. So Jigoro Kano, the founder of judo, typically referred to judo as Kodokan Judo, and he considered that to be its full and correct name. He called it Kodokan Judo, not just judo, because there were other jujitsu schools who had also used the term judo before them. So they had used the term too. And there's another reason as well. Because the term judo is a somewhat categorical term, it's not really a specific term. I know nowadays, when we say judo, we pretty much mean universally Kodokan Judo, Jigoro Kano's judo. But in the early days of Kodokan Judo, that may not have been the default case. Okay. So it's like you saying you want to go fishing. Well, okay, that's a bit of a categorical term. Do you want to go deep sea fishing? Do you want to go fly fishing in a local river? Do you want to go in a small lake and go small lake fishing? What kind of fishing are we talking about? And in theory, that problem exists in judo as well. It's a little bit categorical. And so to make it more clear what judo we're talking about, we say Kodokan Judo. Now, you may push back on that and say that's not strictly necessary. No one else except for Kodokan Judo folks are saying judo. That's true. But in the early days of Kodokan Judo, that may not have been quite so clear. Okay. There was at least the possibility other people could call what they did jujitsu or judo. And at least in some cases, I think perhaps they did. But that's a different story for a different day. So on your notes, I want you to write down the full name of judo. And once again, the full name of judo is Kodokan Judo. That's its proper full name. So take a moment and do that, please. Okay, let's talk about the founder. Jigoro Kano was a scholar, an educator, a government official. He founded Kodokan Judo in 1882 in Eishoji Temple, Tokyo. Okay, so on your notes, write down the judo founder's name, Jigoro Kano, what year it was founded, 1882. So in 1882, judo for me and you, and where? And that was the Eishoji Temple in Tokyo. Okay. Kano was a key figure in the martial arts and in education and in Japanese amateur sports and in the Japanese participation in the Olympics. He was all those things. He was everywhere. He was very much a Renaissance man of his day, and he was an important political figure that has to be understood. So Kano received a mixed scholarly childhood education. He received both the Confucian classics and Western subjects, even in elementary school. Okay. He eventually entered Tokyo Imperial University, and he would go on to hold credentials in literature and politics and economics. And after he graduated with a bachelor's, he did receive a 1 year post graduation seminar in ethics. So Kano began to study jujitsu at age 17, and he studied the Tenshin Shinryu under a man named Fukuda. And on the right there is a 10th degree black belt in judo, and that's Keiko Fukuda, who is that man's granddaughter. And she was the last surviving student of Jigoro Kano. Okay. Another man named Iso, excuse me, became Kano's second instructor, and Kano later studied a different style of jujitsu. I have an error here. I'll have to come back and correct it. Okay. Kano opened his first dojo in 1882 by renting space at a Buddhist temple called Eishoji, located in the Shitaya ward of Tokyo. He initially had 9 students. Kano named his school the Kodokan, the place for study in the way. Okay. And I just realized I didn't actually correct it for you. My apologies. So Kano later studied Kido-ryu under a man not named Masatomo Iso, but under a man named Ikubo. So it was Ikubo who was his third instructor. He had 3 instructors in a row. The first one, Fukuda, passed away. The second one, Iso, also passed away. The third one, Ikubo, was his final instructor, but also instructed a different style of jiu-jitsu, Kido-ryu, the Rise Fall School. Okay, although the Koru teachers instructed students in both Do or Mishi, which is path, and Waza or technique, Kano felt that in the past, too much focus had been on the Waza. There had been too much focus on the practical. Kano explained that he made a deliberate choice to emphasize the Do. He wanted to emphasize the ethics of his teaching. Kano was a scholar and an educator, and he was mindful of the trends of the Meiji Restoration of the new government in Japan. By emphasizing the Do or the path aspect of his Ryu, his school, Kano was also attempting to distance himself from some of the negative perceptions directed at the Koru specifically and the pre-Meiji cultural trends more generally. Kano wrote, "Even if I wanted to teach jujitsu, most people had now stopped thinking about it. So I thought it better to teach under a different name, principally because my objectives were much wider than jujitsu." So he's making it clear here that he changed the name because there were some problems with the way it was perceived or thought about. And also because he didn't just want to teach Waza, he wanted to teach something more than that. Therefore, the rebranding of jujitsu to judo reflects a deeper change. It was fundamentally a realignment of jujitsu from the ethics aligned with the early modern period, the Edo period, the Tokyo period, to the ethics compatible with the new Meiji government. The 3 culture model of judo refers specifically to the 3 benefits judo training provides to students as envisioned by the founder Jigoro Kano, which is the point of judo, and this is also the reason why one should study judo. And those 3 cultures, once again, what they mean is these are the 3 ways judo will help you. So the 3 paths of development for the student would be another way to say this. And those 3 specific cultures are Rentai-ho, or physical education, Shushin-ho, moral training, and Shobu-ho, which is real applications like self-defense and sport. And these were inspired by Herbert Spencer's 3 educations, and prior to that, from the Japanese concept of Saniku Shugi. Okay. Looking at the origins of the model, the 3 culture model of judo is inspired by the 1861 book Education, Intellectual, Moral, and Physical by British utilitarian philosopher Herbert Spencer. Spencer's idea of emphasizing a complete education through balancing intellectual, moral, and physical teaching became deeply rooted in the Japanese public education system in the 1880s through the efforts of Japan's first Minister of Education and a former Satsuma samurai, Mori Arunori. The Japanese educators call this concept of intellectual, moral, and physical education the Sanyuku Shugi, the three educations. And Kano embraced this philosophy into his judo. And in judo, they became translated as Rentai Ho, Shushin Ho, and Shobu Ho. Okay. So looking at Shobuho, which is self-defense and contest judo, sport judo, if you will. Judo would teach a student self-defense, Shobuho. This is the martial culture of judo. It emphasizes the ability to respond effectively to real attacks while also training in shiai or contests, where attack and defense were tested. That's literally what shiai means. It means meeting the test, albeit under controlled circumstances with the rules of the sport. Judo modernized jiu-jitsu's rough contest by emphasizing safety, efficiency, and cooperation, even in competition. So on your notes, I'd like you to pause and write down what Shobuho is. So once again, it's practical judo, it's real judo, it's physical judo. Okay. All right, let's move on. So let's talk about Rentaiho, or physical education. Judo was intended to teach physical fitness education. Rentaiho, or sometimes called Taikyo-ho. Judo training develops the body to be strong, healthy, and coordinated. Ukeme, or breakfall, teaches control. Randori develops stamina. Kata refines structure. This was all part of Kano's larger vision of judo as a system of physical education for all students in schools. So on your note, write down what Rentaiho is: a system of physical education. And finally, we come to Shushinho, or moral training. Judo would provide moral training, or Shushinho. Kano emphasized that judo was not only a martial art, but it was also a very substantial way of shaping character. It's citizenship training, it's moral development. Shushinho reflected modern Japanese civic values, and teaching students cooperation, humility, and respect for others also helps produce positive members of our society. Okay, write down what Shushinho is: moral or ethical development, citizenship development. Now, this is where it gets interesting. The three cultures also aligns closely with what has sometimes been called the three stages of judo that Jigoro Kano stated a practitioner, a judoka, would pass through as they matured. Okay. In stage one, you have judo in the physical sense. In stage two, it's a form of physical education. And in the final stage, stage three, it's moral or philosophical training. Sometimes these have been referred to using Japanese words as lower judo, or Geidan judo, middle judo, or Chundan judo, and then Jodan, or upper level judo. And there's some other phraseologies that have been used before as well. So on your notes, I'd like you to write: judo is a form of physical education that develops the student's mind and body and imparts practical skills. So what is judo? Judo is a form of physical education. What is judo? Judo is a form of physical education. It develops a student's mind and body, and it imparts practical and interesting skills, self-defense skills, sporting skills. Okay. And that was very much of its intention of its founder. He wanted it to be interesting and useful. Now, there are two central principles or underlying philosophies of judo, And these are Serioku Zenyo, um, often translated as the maximum efficient use of energy, and Jitakoe, which is mutual benefit and prosperity. Those two expressions can be put together. It can be Serioku Zenyo, Jitakoe, which could be understood as the good use of energy for mutual benefit. And let's talk about those quite a bit more. Okay. But let's write that down first. So in your notes, please put down Serioku Zenyu is the maximum efficient use of energy. And Jitakoe is mutual benefit and prosperity. So let's break down the terms a little bit. Okay. So you have the idea of essence and power, energy, and then Zen, in this case, is good, and use. So the essence, the strength, the power put to good use. Okay. You could also say Serioku Saizen Katsuo, which is the most moral use of energy. So this idea was influenced, believe it or not, by Herbert Spencer and the second law of thermodynamics. And you would say, what in the world does the second law of thermodynamics have to do with the judo principle? Well, in the mid 1800s, it was discovered that energy is neither created nor destroyed. And that caused some issue in philosophy. That had not been the prevailing theory up to that point. And so the philosophers of the day, like Herbert Spencer, tried to think of a new metaphysics for their universe where they didn't have to just discard centuries of prior philosophy and theology. And so they tried to come up with new, all encompassing philosophy that was based on the good use of energy, the valid, the useful use of energy, the optimal, the best use of energy. So it has quite a bit to do with those Western philosophy and scientific findings. So Seiryoku Zenyu has three correlates, three ideas that can be taken from it. Number one, it's the best use of energy is through one's self-realization. So understanding yourself and maximizing yourself. Okay. And also that self-realization only comes through the process of helping others. As we build others, we build ourselves. And three, understanding that the good use of energy is the foundation of human prosperity. Okay. Seryoku Zenyu might be more fully stated, as we said, as Seryoku Seizen Katsuo, the highest or most moral use of one's energy, the one for the best or greatest purpose, the most moral purpose, the most socially conscious purpose. And this longer phrase was sometimes used by Kano in his later works. Kano drew inspiration from global thinkers like Herbert Spencer and others too. But especially in these particular philosophies, Seryoku Zenyu, that's really from Spencer. Okay. Spencer developed a monistic philosophy, an all-encompassing, all-pervading philosophy in response to, excuse me, I think I said the second law of thermodynamics, but actually it's the first law of thermodynamics, and the idea that energy is neither created nor destroyed. And Kano integrated this idea into judo, and he turned it into the best and most efficient and most moral use of energy is the path to self-realization and human prosperity. And then we go into the idea of jitakoe. And here we have the idea of the self and others flourishing together. So if you want to give it literally, you could say self and others prospering together. If you want to be a bit more poetic, you could say you and I shining together. Okay. This is also a derivative of Herbert Spencer and really more him than anyone else, but it's rooted in an old school ethics test called the Renshi. And that was a text that was published in 1888. It's an ethics text used for the schools. And it seems to be based on an older term called Jide Heiritz, which is a balance of egoism and altruism, balancing the needs of the self and balancing the needs of others. So Kano was influenced once again in this 1880 ethics text because that was extremely based on Spencer's principles of ethics. So it wasn't just Kano, the entire text and the entire education committee working on this textbook really based it on Herbert Spencer. And within that book, in chapter 5, the standards of actions, it includes an English language subheader that says in English, the cooperation of self and others. And then underneath that coins a new term, Jidahirits. So Jidahirits express Spencer's idea that both egoism and altruism must be fulfilled. So both have to be in balance, both have to be fulfilled. And Spencer wrote in his own work, if the maxim live for self is wrong, so also is the maxim live for others. Hence, a compromise is the only possibility. So Kano developed Jita Koe to express this balance both in the self and the benefit of the others must be held in balance. So it has to benefit both. And we know that Kano made many innovations that helped change jujitsu to judo. And this, once again, was a process. It didn't emerge fully overnight, but this includes systematic study of ukeme, or say falling, break falls, the invention of the judo gi as a distinct garment in 1907, and the belt system in 1883, although we might be able to say 1882 as well there. Standardized Japanese terminology, okay, the use of safe randori and structured kata, and then the existence of contest rules, okay, and those were being developed in 1899 through 1900. So here are some important dates in judo. In 1911, judo was allowed to systematically be implemented nationwide in Japanese schools. So judo did exist in Japanese schools where Kano or his direct students, or in some cases his students were teaching or being school leaders, but it wasn't nationally implemented yet. And that didn't happen until 1911. It actually took Kano several attempts to get that passed, to get that approved. It took him 3 times, and he finally lucked out. He finally met requirements. I wouldn't say lucked out. He fulfilled what they were looking for on the third attempt. Okay, and it wasn't until some time later, in the 1930s, that judo actually became mandated in the curriculum, along with some other martial arts. So initially, you had in the late 1800s, early 1900s, judo existing in schools sporadically where Kano or his students were at. Then at 1911, and after that point, it was systematically implemented. And then somewhat later, still in the 1930s, it was actually mandated. Okay. Kano also really was, to a large extent, the Japanese Olympic movement. He was very much its head, or at least its spiritual head, almost right off the bat. And in 1912, Kano attended the Stockholm Olympics in Sweden, and as well as other Olympics, of course, too. Judo was slated to be a demonstration sport. Kano ensured that for the 1940 Tokyo Olympics, but Kano died in 38, and really just a few months later after his death, the Tokyo Olympics were scrapped by the Japanese government in the lead up towards the Second World War. So it never happened. But finally, the Olympics did come to Tokyo in 1964. And at that time, men's judo was a demonstration sport. It became an official full sport at the 72 Munich Games. Okay. And in 1988 in Seoul, it was allowed to be a women's demonstration sport. And then finally in 1992, it was allowed as a full women's Olympic sport. I'd like you to pause here, and in your notes, I want you to write down when judo first appeared in the Olympics for men and women. Okay. So once again, for men, 1964, Tokyo, and in 1988 for women in Seoul, in Korea. I'll give you a couple more seconds to get that done. Let's push on. So, why is Japanese judo's language? Well, Kano is the one who first standardized the terminology. And even though he wrote extensively about judo in English, the actual vocabulary of the art itself was given in Japanese. Okay. And I think that's a good thing. I think that helps preserve the philosophy across cultures. And I think having a standard term in whatever language provides clarity, like Latin for medicine or law. So even if you have different languages, times, and cultures, having a standard vocabulary helps get the points across and helps make things distinct. I can tell you this. It gets confusing when there's not standard terminology in judo. There are 100 official Kodokan techniques, and Mifune's canon of judo that came out in the 1950s or 60s expanded upon that vocabulary quite a bit. But there's lots of ideas or concepts in judo or even techniques that have no standard name. And I have seen several online debates where people from different cultures were arguing about um, the specific name for some technique that didn't even have a specific name. And the heck of it is, they're probably both correct. And in each country, probably that's the legitimate term that's used. So probably no one's right or wrong per se. Okay. And so that's why we use an official language. And that's why it's Japanese. And judo is a Japanese martial art. And Kano, when he wrote about it in terms of its techniques, he wrote about it in Japanese. Okay. So in your notes, I want you to write down why Japanese is used as a language of judo. And the core reason is it provides clarity across times and cultures. Okay. There are four major teaching methods in judo, four pillars of the pedagogy. Now, on this, there's some variation between authors, but in the Renshi Academy book, it uses these four. Okay. I understand that other authorities might vary these up a little bit. Okay. So, number one are kata, reforms. Number two is randori, or free practice. Number three is shiai, competition. And number four is mondo, or dialogue. And these are the ones for this course that they want you to use. Okay. So in your notes, write down the four methods of teaching judo: kata, randori, shiai, and mondo. Mondo is dialogue, mondo is questions and answers. Okay. Give you a few more seconds to get that done, and we're almost done. Okay, I want to thank you for joining me today. At this time, we are done.